I never believed in fate until the night I heard his voice. My name is Emma Parker, 28 years old, and I've spent the last 6 years building firewalls that could stop governments. I'm good at what I do. Too good, maybe. That Wednesday night in Chicago, rain hammering against my apartment windows, I was testing a new security protocol for Nexus systems when everything changed. The software was designed to detect vulnerabilities in encrypted communications, a routine penetration test that I'd run 1,000 times before. But at 11:47 p.m., my screen lit up with something that shouldn't exist. An unencrypted backdoor in what was supposed to be military-grade encryption. My fingers flew across the keyboard, curiosity overriding caution. I told myself I was just doing my job, ensuring our client's security. The truth? I couldn't resist a puzzle, and this was the kind of challenge that made my pulse race. I initiated a trace protocol, expecting to find some amateur hacker's botched attempt at creating a secure line. Instead, I stumbled into a live conversation, crystal clear, as if the speakers were in the room with me. 2 men, their voices distorted by modulators, but the content? Absolutely chilling. The shipment arrives Thursday at the port of Chicago, one voice said, mechanical and cold. Pier 17, 3 containers marked as agricultural equipment. Payment? The second voice asked. This one was different, deeper, with an edge of authority that made my breath catch. Even through the modulator, I could hear the power behind it. Wire transfer, same account as last time, 20 million. I should have disconnected right then. Should have erased every trace of the connection and pretended I'd never heard a thing. But I'm my father's daughter, and Thomas Parker didn't raise me to run from the truth. Instead, I started recording, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it over the rain. My hands trembled as I initiated a secondary trace, trying to identify the source of the transmission. The data stream was complex, routing through 17 different servers across 9 countries. But there was a pattern. There's always a pattern if you know how to look. That's when I saw it. Buried in the metadata, hidden behind layers of encryption that would have fooled anyone else, was a financial trail. Account numbers, timestamps, transfer protocols, all pointing to a massive money laundering operation. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of millions of dollars moving through shell corporations, each transaction perfectly timed to avoid detection. It was brilliant, really. Whoever designed this system understood both criminal enterprise and legitimate banking better than anyone I'd ever encountered. Impossible, I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. But I'd forgotten the most important rule of signal interception. Never make a sound on an open line. The conversation stopped instantly. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any words could have been. I held my breath, frozen, watching my monitors with the kind of dread that turns your blood to ice. For 5 seconds. 5 eternal seconds. Nothing happened. Then came his voice again, no longer distorted, as if he'd turned off the modulator specifically so I could hear him clearly. Who is that? The question was quiet, controlled, but underneath was something that made every instinct I had scream danger. His voice was deep, resonant, with a Chicago accent softened by years of careful cultivation. It was the voice of someone who'd spent a lifetime commanding rooms, the kind of voice that made people obey without question. Someone's on this line. Find them. Now. I didn't wait to hear more. My fingers flew across the keyboard, initiating emergency disconnect protocols, wiping cache files, destroying logs. But I'd been on the line for almost 4 minutes, an eternity in digital forensics. If they were as good as I suspected, they'd have started tracing me the moment I connected. I had maybe 90 seconds before they pinpointed my location. Maybe less. The thought made my mouth go dry. I grabbed my laptop, yanked out the Ethernet cable, and ran to my bedroom closet where I kept my emergency kit. My father had taught me to always have an exit strategy, though I'd never imagined I'd actually need one. Inside the kit was cash, a prepaid phone, Fake IDs, all the paranoid preparations of a man who'd known danger intimately. Dad had been dead for 10 years, but his lessons lived on, muscle memory kicking in when terror threatened to freeze me. My phone rang. My actual phone. The one only 6 people had the number to. I stared at it, watching unknown caller flash on the screen, and felt my world tilt. They couldn't have traced me that fast. It was impossible. I'd used 7 different proxy servers, routed through. It rang again. Against every instinct screaming at me to run, I answered, "Emma Parker." That same voice from the intercepted call, speaking my name like he'd known it all along. No distortion now, just pure, terrifying certainty. 28 years old, systems analyst at Nexus Security. Lives alone at 1247 West Monroe Street, apartment 4B. Daughter of Thomas Parker, deceased. Shall I continue? My legs gave out. I sank onto my bed, the laptop forgotten beside me. How did I find you so quickly? A dark chuckle. You're good, Emma. Better than most. That trace you initiated, that secondary protocol you thought was so clever, it left a signature. A very specific signature that only someone trained by Thomas Parker would use. I recognized it immediately. The mention of my father's name hit me like a physical blow. You knew my dad? Knew him? Another pause. This one waited with something I couldn't identify. Thomas Parker taught me everything I know about digital security. He was my mentor, my friend, and the finest man I ever met. Which makes this situation particularly complicated. I couldn't process this. My father, the quiet systems analyst who'd worked for Chicago Municipal Systems, had mentored a criminal. It didn't make sense. Nothing made sense. I don't understand. No, you wouldn't. Thomas kept his worlds very separate, protected you and your mother from everything. But here you are anyway, stumbling into my business, using his methods. Tell me, Emma, did he teach you the Parker protocol? The 3-tier encryption with the recursive key generation? My blood ran cold. The Parker protocol was something my father had developed, something he'd taught me in secret during late nights in his home office. He'd made me promise never to show anyone, never to use it except in emergencies. I'd always thought it was just his paranoia, his way of making our coding lessons feel more exciting. He mentioned it. He mentioned it, the voice repeated, amused. Such modesty. You used a modified version of it tonight. That's how I knew it was you. There's only one other person alive who knows that protocol, and she's much older than you. Which means you're Sarah's daughter, Thomas's little girl, the one he was so desperate to protect. Who are you? My voice came out as a whisper. My name is Marcus Donovan, and you and I need to have a very serious conversation about what you heard tonight, what you think you know, and what happens next. I'm going to give you an address. You're going to come alone, tonight, within the next 2 hours. If you go to the police, if you tell anyone about this call, if you try to run, Emma, you're smart enough to know how this ends. You'll kill me, I said flatly. No. His voice softened just slightly. If I wanted you dead, you'd be dead. But I made a promise to your father a long time ago, and I keep my promises. So I'm giving you a choice. Come meet me. Let me explain what's really happening here. Or spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. Because now that you've stumbled into this, now that you've heard what you've heard, you're either with me or you're a liability. And I don't leave liabilities loose, Emma. Not even Thomas Parker's daughter. The line went dead. I sat there in my darkened apartment, rain still drumming against the windows, holding a phone that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. My entire body was shaking. In the space of 15 minutes, my safe, predictable life had shattered. I'd intercepted a criminal conspiracy, been traced by someone who seemed to know everything about me, and discovered that my father, my quiet, gentle father who died of a supposed heart attack when I was 18, had connections to the Chicago underworld. I thought about calling Jake, my best friend since college, but Marcus's warning echoed in my mind. Tell anyone, and the deal's off. I thought about calling my mother, but what would I say? Hey, Mom. Did you know Dad trained criminals? Sarah Parker had suffered enough when Dad died. I wouldn't drag her into whatever this was, so I did the only thing I could do. I grabbed my jacket, slipped my laptop into my bag, and checked the address Marcus had sent in a follow-up text. It was in the warehouse district, naturally, because of course the terrifying crime boss wanted to meet in an abandoned warehouse at 1 a.m. I almost laughed at the cliché of it, except nothing about this felt funny. As I locked my apartment and headed for my car, I tried to remember everything my father had taught me. Not just about coding and security, but about people. Trust your instincts, he'd always said. And if something seems too dangerous to be true, it probably is. But sometimes, Emma, sometimes you have to walk into danger to find the truth. Well, Dad, I thought as I started my car, I hope you knew what you were talking about, because I'm about to walk straight into danger, and I have no idea if I'll walk back out. The warehouse district at night is a different world. Empty streets, broken streetlights, and the kind of silence that feels alive, watching. I parked 2 blocks away from the address Marcus had given me, years of my father's paranoid lessons kicking in. Always leave yourself an exit route. Never let them box you in. I sat in my car for a full minute, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to calm my racing heart. This was insane. I was walking into a meeting with a criminal based on nothing but his word and some twisted connection to my dead father. But I'd heard that money laundering operation. I'd seen those numbers. And Marcus Donovan knew things about Dad that I didn't, which meant there was a truth here I needed to understand. Even if it killed me, especially if it meant finally understanding who Thomas Parker really was. I got out of the car, adjusted my laptop bag on my shoulder, and started walking. The warehouse was exactly what I'd expected. Massive, industrial, probably abandoned for years. But as I approached, I noticed details that suggested otherwise. New security cameras mounted at strategic angles, fresh tire tracks in the gravel, a side door that looked recently reinforced. This wasn't an abandoned building. This was a fortress disguised as ruins. The door opened before I could knock. A man stood there, 6'4", built like he ate smaller men for breakfast. He didn't say anything, just gestured for me to follow. I did, because what else was I going to do? Run? They'd already proven they could find me anywhere. Inside, the warehouse was a study in contrasts. The exterior might have been deliberately decrepit, but the interior was pristine. Polished concrete floors, modern lighting, glass-walled offices along one side. And in the center, sitting at a conference table like he was conducting a legitimate business meeting, was Marcus Donovan. He was younger than I'd expected, 42 maybe, though he carried himself with the confidence of someone much older. Dark hair, with just a touch of gray at the temples, strong features, and eyes that seemed to catalog everything about me in a single glance. He wore an expensive suit with the jacket off and sleeves rolled up, and there was something almost casual about the way he sat there, one hand wrapped around a glass of what looked like whiskey. But casual was an illusion. This was a man who controlled every aspect of his environment, who probably calculated every movement 3 steps ahead. Emma Parker. He stood as I approached, surprisingly formal. Thank you for coming. I know that took courage. Or stupidity, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I haven't decided which yet. A slight smile touched his lips. Your father said the same thing the first time we met. He stood exactly where you're standing now, 22 years ago, and told me I was either the smartest person he'd met or the most dangerous. Turns out he was right on both counts. You said you knew my dad. I need more than that. I need to understand what I've walked into. Marcus gestured to a chair across from him. Sit. Please. This is going to take a while, and I have a feeling you're not going anywhere until you get answers. He waited until I sat before continuing. Your father and I met in 1993. I was 20 years old, trying to build something in this city, and I needed someone who understood systems, banking systems specifically. Thomas Parker was working for Chicago Municipal at the time, but he was freelancing on the side. Someone recommended him to me. Freelancing for criminals, I said flatly. Freelancing for people who needed discretion, Marcus corrected. At first it was simple work, helping me understand how money moved through legitimate channels, where the vulnerabilities were, how to avoid detection. Your father was brilliant at it. Not because he was a criminal, Emma, but because he understood systems better than anyone I'd ever met. He could look at a complex network and see patterns that no one else could. I thought about the way Dad used to work, the way he'd stare at screens of code for hours and suddenly see the solution that had eluded everyone else. He was teaching me that, the pattern recognition. I know. He talked about you constantly. Showed me your school projects, your first programming assignments. He was so proud of you. Marcus's expression softened. And he was terrified that you'd follow in his footsteps. Not the legitimate work, but this. He gestured around the warehouse. This world. That's why he kept it from you. Why he maintained such strict separation. If he was just a consultant, why all the secrecy? Why the protocols, the emergency kits, all the paranoid preparations? Marcus took a sip of his whiskey, choosing his words carefully. Because about 12 years ago, Thomas discovered something. He was doing routine work for me, analyzing transaction patterns, when he found irregularities. Money that was being skimmed from my operations and routed elsewhere. At first, we thought it was just standard theft. Someone in my organization getting greedy. But the more Thomas dug, the more he realized it was something bigger. Someone was using my network to launder money for international operations. Drug cartels, arms dealers, human trafficking. My stomach turned. And my father helped you stop it? He tried. For 2 years, Thomas worked to trace the real source. He built the Parker Protocol specifically to track these people without them knowing they were being tracked. He was getting close, Emma. Too close. And then... Marcus's jaw tightened. Then he died. Heart attack, the official report said. 41 years old, perfectly healthy, and his heart just gave out. You don't believe that. It wasn't a question. Neither did your mother, though she never said it out loud. Sarah knew Thomas was involved in something dangerous. She asked him to stop, begged him to walk away. But your father was stubborn. He'd found evidence of operations that were hurting people, really hurting them, and he couldn't let it go. Even when I told him to stop, that it wasn't worth his life, he kept digging. I sat back, processing this. 10 years I'd mourned my father. 10 years I'd accepted the story that his heart had just failed. But there was a ring of truth to Marcus's words that I couldn't deny. Dad had been stressed those last months, working late, taking calls at odd hours. Mom had thought he was having an affair. I'd thought he was just overworked. Who killed him? I don't know, not for certain, but I have suspicions. Marcus leaned forward, his dark eyes intense. The same operation your father was tracking is still active. Bigger now, more sophisticated. And tonight, when you intercepted that call, you stumbled into the middle of it. The shipment we were discussing? It's not mine. It's theirs, whoever they are. I've been working for 10 years to finish what Thomas started, to find these people and shut them down. Why? I challenged. Why would a crime boss care about other criminals? Because they killed my friend. The raw emotion in those words startled me. Because Thomas Parker was the best man I knew, and someone murdered him for getting too close to the truth. Because I made him a promise, Emma. The night before he died, we met at a coffee shop in Lincoln Park. He told me he was close to identifying the real players. He also told me that if anything happened to him, I needed to protect you and Sarah. He gave me your college fund information, insurance policies, everything. Made me swear I'd watch over his family. I never saw you, never heard from you. That was the point. Protection doesn't mean hovering. It means making sure certain problems never reach you in the first place. That scholarship you got to Northwestern, the one that covered everything your father's life insurance didn't, I funded it. The job offer from Nexus Systems right after graduation, when you had no professional experience. I made a call. The apartment you live in a building with better security than most banks. I own that building, Emma. For 10 years, I've kept my promise to Thomas Parker. I've kept you safe. I felt like the ground was shifting under me. Everything I'd accomplished, everything I'd thought I'd earned through my own merit, had been orchestrated by this man. The violation of it, the manipulation, made me furious. But underneath the anger was something else. The realization that I'd been protected, that someone had cared enough to honor a dead man's wishes for a decade. So what now? I asked. You've explained the past. What about the present? What about what I heard tonight? Marcus's expression hardened. What you heard was me setting a trap. The man I was talking to is named Viktor Sokolov, mid-level operator for an organization I've been tracking. The shipment is real, but it's not what he thinks it is. I've spent 6 months setting up this operation, getting Viktor to trust me, working my way into their network. If all goes according to plan, that shipment will lead me directly to the people at the top, the people who killed your father. And then what? You kill them? I bring them down, expose them. Let the authorities handle it. He saw my skeptical look. I know what you're thinking. Why would I go legitimate now? Because I'm tired, Emma. Tired of this life. Tired of looking over my shoulder. Tired of being what this city turned me into. And because I owe Thomas Parker justice. He died trying to protect people from monsters. The least I can do is finish what he started. I wanted to believe him. God help me. Part of me did believe him. But I'd also just learned that my entire adult life had been manipulated by this man, however well-intentioned. You can't expect me to just accept this, any of this. I don't. I expect you to do exactly what your father would do. Verify everything I've told you. Use that brilliant mind of yours to dig into my story. Find the truth. That's why I had you bring your laptop. Marcus nodded toward my bag. I'm going to give you access to files that Thomas compiled. Evidence he gathered, notes he made, everything he discovered before he died. Review it. Analyze it. Decide for yourself if I'm telling you the truth. He stood, walked to one of the glass offices, and returned with a secure drive. Everything's encrypted with a variation of the Parker protocol. You're the only person besides me who can open these files. Your father made sure of that. He embedded a biometric lock. It requires your specific patterns of data entry, the way you type, the rhythm of your keystrokes. He told me once that if anything happened to him, you'd be the one to finish this. I think he knew, even then, that you'd end up exactly here. I took the drive, feeling its weight in my palm. And if I decide you're lying, if I think you're just manipulating me, then you walk away. I'll give you 24 hours to review everything. After that, we meet again, same place, and you tell me your decision. Either you help me finish what Thomas started, or you go back to your life, and I make sure you're protected from the fallout. But Emma," his voice dropped, "if you walk away, you'll never know the truth about your father. You'll never know who killed him or why. Can you live with that?" He was right, and we both knew it. I couldn't walk away. Not now. Not when I was this close to understanding what had really happened to my father. 24 hours, I agreed. And Marcus? If I find out you're lying about any of this, if this is some elaborate manipulation, you'll expose me, I know. Your father taught you well. That's exactly what he would have done. Marcus walked me back to the door, the giant security guard appearing from wherever he'd been lurking. "One more thing, Emma. The people who killed Thomas, they're still out there, still active. And if they find out you're digging into this, if they realize you're Thomas Parker's daughter following in his footsteps, they'll come after you. Stay alert. Trust no one. And for God's sake, don't use your regular systems to access those files. Your father's protocols are good, but these people are better." As I walked back to my car through the empty streets, the secure drive burning a hole in my pocket, I realized my life would never be the same. 24 hours ago, I was a systems analyst with a quiet life and buried grief. Now I was the daughter of a murdered whistleblower, being recruited by a crime boss to finish a decade-old investigation, holding evidence that could either vindicate my father's memory or destroy everything I thought I knew about him. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and gleaming under the sparse streetlights. Somewhere in this city, my father's killers were walking free, and somewhere in the encrypted files on the drive in my pocket was the truth. I had 24 hours to decide if I was brave enough or foolish enough to pursue it. I didn't go home. Instead, I drove to Jake Sullivan's apartment in Wicker Park, the only person I trusted absolutely. Jake had been my best friend since we'd bonded over a particularly brutal algorithms course at Northwestern 9 years ago. He knew about my father's death, knew how much it had affected me, and he'd understand why I needed a safe place to work. More importantly, Jake was a network security expert himself. If anyone could help me verify what Marcus had told me, it was him. He answered the door in pajama pants and a faded Star Wars t-shirt, his sandy hair sticking up in every direction. "Emma? It's 2 a.m. What?" He stopped when he saw my face. "Come in. I'll make coffee." 20 minutes later, we were sitting in his home office, a room that made my setup look minimalist. Jake had built his own security protocols, 3 monitors running simultaneously, and enough encryption to make the NSA jealous. I'd given him the abbreviated version of the night's events, leaving out some of the more dangerous details. I told him I'd stumbled onto something related to Dad's work, that I'd been contacted by someone who claimed to know what really happened to him. "And you believe this guy?" Jake asked, skeptical but intrigued. He was 29, a year older than me, with the kind of brilliant analytical mind that saw problems as puzzles to be solved. "I don't know what I believe. That's why I'm here. I need to access these files in a secure environment, and I need someone to tell me if I'm being played." I held up the drive. "This supposedly contains evidence my father compiled before he died. Evidence about the people who might have killed him." Jake's expression shifted from concerned to determined. "Okay, let's see what we're dealing with. But Emma, if this is as serious as you're saying, we need to be careful. We'll route everything through my isolated system. No outside connections. And we'll document everything in case this goes sideways." He set up his most secure computer, a system that had never touched the internet, with its own power supply and completely isolated architecture. As he worked, I thought about Marcus's warning. These people are better. Better than my father, who'd been brilliant. Better than Marcus, who'd survived decades in the criminal underworld. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, it made me more determined. "Ready?" Jake announced. Let's see what Thomas Parker left for you. I plugged in the drive, and immediately a custom interface loaded. My father's design, I recognized it instantly. The encryption prompt appeared, but instead of asking for a password, it presented a blank coding window. It's a challenge response system, I realized. I have to write code to unlock it. What kind of code? Something only I would write. Something that proves I'm really Thomas Parker's daughter. I stared at the screen, thinking about all the lessons Dad had taught me, all the late nights we'd spent coding together. Then I understood. He'd always made me solve a specific problem as a warm-up exercise, his way of teaching me to think creatively. I started typing, recreating that old familiar solution, my fingers falling into patterns that Dad had drilled into me years ago. The drive unlocked. What appeared on the screen made both Jake and me lean forward in shock. It wasn't just files, it was an entire investigation database. Spreadsheets tracking financial transactions, timeline documents, encrypted communications my father had intercepted, photographs, maps, and at the center of it all, a complex web diagram showing connections between dozens of individuals and organizations. Holy shit, Jake breathed. Your dad was investigating a massive criminal network. Not just investigating, I said, clicking through the files. He was building a case. Look at this. Everything is documented with sources, timestamps, verification methods. This is the kind of evidence that could bring down an entire organization. I opened a video file, and my father's face appeared on screen. He looked older than I remembered, tired, with worry lines I hadn't noticed when I was 18. The timestamp showed it was recorded 3 days before he died. Emma, sweetheart, if you're watching this, then I'm probably dead. His voice, so familiar and achingly missed, made tears spring to my eyes. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for keeping this from you, for not being honest about the work I was really doing. But I need you to understand why. I need you to know that everything I did, every risk I took, was to make this city safer. For you, for your mother, for everyone. Dad leaned back in his chair. I recognized it as his home office chair, the one he'd spent countless hours in. I've discovered something terrible. An organization operating within the criminal underworld that makes normal organized crime look like amateur hour. They're not just moving drugs or running protection rackets. They're facilitating everything from human trafficking to illegal weapons sales to money laundering for terrorist organizations. And they're doing it using infrastructure that legitimate businesses rely on. He pulled up documents on his own screen, showing them to the camera. I've traced their operations across 17 countries. The money flows through banks in Switzerland, the Cayman Islands, Singapore, all legitimate institutions that have no idea they're being used. The organization uses shell corporations, each one perfectly legal on paper, to move money and goods. It's brilliant and horrifying in equal measure. Dad's expression hardened. I've identified some of the key players. At the top is someone they call the architect. I don't have a real name yet, but I'm close. What I do know is that the architect has connections everywhere: police departments, city government, federal agencies. They've built a network that's almost impossible to take down from the outside. The only way to stop them is to expose the entire operation at once, to gather enough evidence that even corrupted officials can't ignore it. He paused, and when he continued, his voice was softer. I'm working with someone to do exactly that. Marcus Donovan. I know how that sounds. I know you'll probably learn about Marcus and think I'd lost my mind, trusting a criminal. But Marcus is different. He's got his own code, his own sense of justice. And he's as determined as I am to stop the architect. We've been working together for 2 years, building this case, gathering evidence. But I'm running out of time. I've been warned to back off. Threats against you and your mother. Threats that are very specific, very real. So I'm taking precautions. I've encrypted everything, set up protocols that will protect you if something happens to me. Marcus has promised to watch over you both, and I believe he'll keep that promise. He's a man of his word, even if his word is given in the darkest corners of Chicago. Dad looked directly into the camera, his eyes intense. If you're watching this, Emma, it means I failed to expose them before they got to me. But you can finish this. You're smarter than I ever was, more capable than you know. The evidence is all here. Follow the money, follow the patterns, and you'll find them. But please, please be careful. These people have already taken me from you. Don't let them take anything else. The video ended. I sat there, tears streaming down my face, while Jake put a hand on my shoulder. Emma, I'm so sorry. I can't imagine. He was murdered, I said, my voice steady despite the tears. All these years they said it was a heart attack, natural causes. But someone killed him because he got too close to the truth. And this Marcus guy knew about it? Was working with your dad? I nodded, opening more files. Marcus told me the truth. Everything he said tonight matches what's in these files. Look, here's evidence of the money laundering operation I intercepted tonight. Dad had already identified it years ago. And here, I opened a document labeled Active Investigations. Here's a list of operations the architect is running. Human trafficking out of the Port of Chicago, weapons shipments to militia groups, drug distribution networks across the Midwest. It's all here. Jake leaned closer, his analytical mind taking over. Okay, so your father was building a case against this architect person, working with Marcus Donovan. But if your dad had all this evidence, why didn't he just go to the police? Because the architect has people everywhere. Look at this. I pulled up another file, this one containing names and photographs. These are law enforcement officers on the architect's payroll. FBI agents, Chicago PD detectives, prosecutors. If Dad had gone to the wrong person, he would have been signing his own death warrant. Which he did anyway, Jake said grimly. Emma, this is way beyond anything we should be handling. This is federal-level criminal activity. We should... Should what? Go to the police? Dad's files show that we can't trust them. Go to the FBI? Half these names are federal agents. The only people who know the full scope of this are me and Marcus. And Marcus has spent 10 years trying to finish what Dad started. Jake ran his hands through his hair, a nervous gesture I'd seen 1,000 times. So what's the play? You helped this crime boss bring down other criminals? How is that supposed to work? I was already thinking 3 steps ahead, the way Dad had taught me. Marcus said he's been setting up an operation, getting inside their network, gaining trust. The shipment I heard about tonight, it's supposed to lead him to the people at the top. But he needs help. Technical help. Someone who can track their communications, follow the money, do what Dad was doing. Someone like you. But someone like me, I confirmed. I looked at Jake, my best friend, the person who'd stood by me through everything. I have to do this. I have to finish what Dad started. But I can't do it alone. I need someone I trust, someone who's good enough to handle this level of complexity. I need you, Jake. He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the internal debate playing out across his face. This was insane, dangerous, possibly suicidal. But Jake had known my father too. Dad had helped him land his first job, had been a mentor to both of us. And Jake, like me, had always wondered about the too convenient timing of that heart attack. I'm in, he said finally. But we do this smart. We document everything. We maintain backups in multiple secure locations, and we set up deadman switches. If something happens to us, if the architect comes after us like they went after your dad, we make sure the evidence still gets out. Agreed? Agreed. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't alone in this anymore. Okay. Let's start by analyzing what Dad already compiled. We need to understand his methodology, see how close he got to identifying the architect. Then we need to figure out how Marcus's current operation fits into the bigger picture. We worked through the night, the sun rising over Chicago while we were still deep in my father's files. And what we discovered was both terrifying and illuminating. Dad had been incredibly close. He'd traced the architect's network to a specific geographic region, had narrowed down the possible identity to fewer than 10 individuals. He'd even identified a pattern in the timing of operations that suggested the architect had a specific background, someone with military or intelligence training, someone who thought strategically on a large scale. But there was something else, something that made my blood run cold. In a file dated 2 days before his death, Dad had written a single note. Confirmed. Operation Thursday, similar to 95. DK likely involved. Must verify before approaching MD. DK, Jake said. Who's DK? I searched through the files, cross-referencing the initials. When I found the answer, I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. Dmitry Kozlov. He's listed here as a known associate of Marcus's. Former Soviet intelligence, immigrated to Chicago in the early 90s. Dad's notes suggest Dmitry was involved in operations that predated the architect's network, but he's connected somehow. You think Dmitry might be the architect? I think Dad thought so, or at least suspected him enough to investigate before telling Marcus. But if Dmitry is connected to Marcus, if they work together, the implications made me sick. Had Marcus been lying to me? Was this entire thing a setup? We need more information, Jake said firmly. Before you meet with Marcus again, we need to know exactly who Dmitry Kozlov is and what role he plays. If Marcus is protecting him, if he's been lying about wanting to bring down the architect, then you're walking into a trap. He was right. I had 18 hours before I was supposed to meet Marcus again. 18 hours to figure out if the man I was supposed to trust was actually my father's killer. The evidence Dad had compiled was brilliant, comprehensive, but it didn't answer the one question that mattered most. Who could I trust? I thought about Marcus's eyes when he talked about my father, the genuine grief I'd heard in his voice. I thought about the way he'd kept his promise for 10 years, protecting me and Mom without ever asking for anything in return. But I also thought about Dad's note, about his caution regarding DK, about the fact that he'd died before he could verify his suspicions. Let's dig into Dmitry Kozlov, I said. Everything we can find. Public records, criminal databases, any mention in Dad's files. And let's trace Marcus's operations over the last 10 years. If he's been genuinely trying to bring down the architect, there should be evidence of it. If he's been protecting them, then we'll find that too. Jake finished. He looked at me seriously. Emma, promise me something. If we find proof that Marcus killed your father, if we discover this is all a lie, you won't confront him alone. You won't try to be a hero. We take everything we have and we find someone trustworthy to bring them down, okay? Okay, I promised, though part of me wondered if I'd be able to keep that promise. If Marcus Donovan had killed my father, had spent 10 years manipulating me while pretending to honor Dad's memory, I didn't know what I'd do. But I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't let him get away with it. The game was changing. I was no longer just looking for the truth about what happened to Dad. I was trying to determine if the man offering to help me was actually the enemy. And I had less than a day to figure it out before I walked back into that warehouse for my answer. Outside Jake's window, Chicago was waking up. People heading to work, living normal lives, completely unaware that somewhere in this city, a battle was being fought in the shadows. A battle my father had died fighting. A battle I'd now inherited. I just had to make sure I survived long enough to finish it. By noon, Jake and I had compiled a disturbing profile of Dmitry Kozlov. The man was a ghost, someone who'd mastered the art of existing in the shadows. Born in Moscow in 1977, former KGB, or what became the FSB after the Soviet Union collapsed. Dmitry had arrived in Chicago in 1994, part of the wave of Russian immigrants who'd flooded into American cities after the Cold War ended. But unlike most immigrants seeking legitimate opportunities, Dmitry had brought his intelligence training with him. "Look at this," Jake said, pulling up a customs record from O'Hare Airport. March 1994, Dmitry Kozlov enters the country on a business visa, declares himself as a consultant for a software company that, surprise, surprise, dissolved 6 months later. He's been here ever since, and he's never held a legitimate job. At least not one that pays taxes. I scanned through the financial records we'd managed to pull. But he's not poor. Look at these property records. He owns 3 buildings in Chicago, all purchased with cash. A restaurant in Greektown, a shipping company at the port, and a security consulting firm. All of them could be legitimate businesses or perfect fronts for criminal activity. "The timing bothers me," Jake continued, pulling up a timeline he'd created. "Your dad died in February 2015. 4 months later, Dmitry's businesses suddenly start showing significantly higher revenues. His restaurant, which had been barely breaking even, suddenly becomes one of the most profitable establishments in the area. His shipping company starts handling 5 times the volume it had before. It's like someone opened the floodgates. I felt sick, because Dad wasn't there to investigate anymore. If Dmitry is the architect, if he was being careful while my father was watching, then Dad's death would have freed him to expand operations. There's more. Jake opened another file. I cross-referenced Dmitry's known associates with the names in your dad's files. Guess who appears on both lists? Marcus, I said, my heart sinking. Marcus, Jake confirmed. They've known each other for over 20 years. There are photographs of them together at various events, charity fundraisers, business dinners, even a fishing trip in 2012. They're not just associates, Emma. They're friends. I thought about Marcus's story, about how he'd been working to bring down the architect for 10 years. But what if it was all a lie? What if Marcus was protecting Dmitry, and bringing me in was a way to control the narrative, to make sure Thomas Parker's evidence never saw the light of day? We need to know what Marcus has actually been doing, I said, pushing away the doubt that threatened to overwhelm me. Dad trusted him enough to work with him, to share information with him. There has to be a reason for that trust. Let's trace Marcus's operations over the last decade. If he's been genuinely trying to expose the architect, there should be signs. We spent the next 4 hours diving deep into Marcus Donovan's criminal empire, and what we found was fascinating. Marcus ran a sophisticated operation, yes, but it was surprisingly restrained. No drug trafficking. In fact, there was evidence he actively opposed the drug trade in his territory. No human trafficking, no involvement in violent crimes beyond what was necessary to maintain control. His primary operations seemed to be centered around gambling, money laundering for legitimate businesses trying to avoid taxes, and what might generously be called protection services. He's not a saint, Jake observed, but he's not the monster he could be either. Look at this. 3 years ago, there was an attempt to start a heroin distribution network in his territory. Marcus shut it down hard. 2 of the people involved ended up in the hospital, the rest fled the city. Because he doesn't want drugs in his area, or because he was protecting his own interests? Maybe both? Jake pulled up another file. But Emma, look at this pattern. Every time there's been a major operation involving human trafficking, weapons smuggling, or anything related to what your dad called the Architects Network, Marcus has either actively opposed it or stayed completely clear. It's like he's deliberately avoiding those territories. Or he's smart enough to keep his distance from operations that might attract federal attention, I countered, but I was starting to doubt my own skepticism. The evidence suggested that Marcus had been telling the truth, at least about some things. Then Jake found something that changed everything. Buried in a series of encrypted files my father had created, hidden behind layers of security protocols, was a communication log. Messages between Thomas Parker and Marcus Donovan, exchanged over a secure channel, dating from 2013 to just days before Dad died. "Oh my God," I whispered, reading through them. They weren't just working together. They were friends. Real friends. The messages showed a relationship built on mutual respect and trust. Marcus asking Dad for advice about keeping his younger brother out of trouble. Dad sending Marcus photos from my high school graduation, proud father commentary included. Marcus joking about teaching Dad to play poker. Dad complaining about Sarah's obsession with redecorating the house. These weren't the communications of a crime boss and his reluctant consultant. These were the messages of two men who genuinely cared about each other. And then, in the final messages, the tone shifted. Dad had found something big. "MD, I think I know who the architect is, but I need to verify before I can share. It's someone close to both of us, someone we trust. If I'm right, this changes everything. Give me 48 hours. Marcus's response was immediate. "Thomas, if you're in danger, tell me who it is now. I can protect you. I can protect Emma and Sarah. Don't try to do this alone." Dad's final message, sent the day before he died. "Can't risk it yet. Need absolute proof. But MD, if something happens to me, protect my family. Promise me. And finish this. Don't let them win. The key to everything is in the pattern. Look at the operations from '95. DK was there. So was someone else. Someone unexpected. That's the real architect." The messages stopped. The next day, Thomas Parker died of a supposed heart attack at his desk at work. I sat back, processing this. Dad suspected Dimitri, but he also thought there was someone else. Someone unexpected. Someone who was involved in operations from 1995. Jake was already searching through the files. "Your dad referenced 95 several times. Let's see what happened that year." He pulled up Dad's timeline documents, scrolling back to 1995. Here, March 1995. Major operation at the Port of Chicago. Weapons shipment intercepted by the Coast Guard, but most of the people involved escaped. The operation was sophisticated, required inside knowledge of port security and Coast Guard patrol patterns. Who was involved? According to your dad's notes, the operation was run by a coalition of different organizations. Russian mob, including Dmitry Kozlov, Marcus Donovan's crew, and... Jake stopped, his face paling. "Emma, there was another group involved. A consulting firm that provided the security analysis and timing for the operation." "What firm?" "Nexus Systems, the same company you work for now. The same company Marcus supposedly helped you get a job at." The room spun. Nexus Systems, my employer for 6 years, had been involved in criminal operations. That couldn't be right. Nexus was legitimate, respected, one of the top security firms in Chicago. We worked with banks, hospitals, government agencies. We were the good guys. "There has to be a mistake," I said, but Jake was already pulling up more information. "It's not a mistake. Look, in 1995, Nexus was a smaller company, just starting out. They specialized in security consulting, which apparently included helping criminals time their operations to avoid detection. Over the next few years, they cleaned up their image, started taking only legitimate clients. By the time you joined, they were completely legit, but the company's founders knew exactly what kind of work they used to do." "Who founded Nexus?" Jake opened the corporate records. 3 people. Richard Chen, who retired in 2018, Maria Castellanos, who died in a car accident in 2020, and, I prompted, though I already knew I wasn't going to like the answer. "And Viktor Volkov, who currently serves as the company's chief operating officer. Emma, the man who founded your company, is Dmitry Kozlov's cousin. They immigrated together in 1994. I felt like I couldn't breathe. For 6 years, I'd been working for a company with direct ties to the person who might have killed my father. A company Marcus had helped me get a job at. Was this all part of some elaborate plan? Had I been under surveillance this entire time, monitored to make sure I never stumbled onto the truth about Dad's death? We need to figure out if Viktor Volkov is the architect, I said, forcing myself to think clearly. If he founded Nexus using knowledge from criminal operations, if he's connected to Dmitri, if he was involved in the 95 operation Dad kept referencing, he fits the profile. There's one way to test it, Jake said slowly. The shipment Marcus mentioned, the one coming in tomorrow at Pier 17. If Volkov is the architect, he'll be involved somehow. We need to track Nexus Systems' activities over the next 24 hours, see if there's any unusual behavior from Volkov. I checked my watch. I had 6 hours until my meeting with Marcus. 6 hours to figure out if I could trust him, if the evidence pointed toward Dmitri and Volkov, or if I was being played by everyone around me. Can you monitor Volkov's communications? Track his movements? I can try. But Emma, if he's as good as your dad thought the architect was, he'll have counter-surveillance protocols. The minute I start digging too hard, he'll know someone's watching. Then we have to be subtle. Use methods Dad taught us. Pattern analysis instead of direct surveillance. Look at the metadata, the timing, the correlations. Don't try to break into his systems. Just watch what he does with them. Jake nodded, already setting up the monitoring protocols. While he worked, I reviewed everything we'd learned. Dad had suspected Dmitri was involved, but thought someone else was pulling the strings. Marcus claimed to be working to bring down the architect, but was close friends with Dmitri. Viktor Volkov had founded my company using expertise gained from criminal operations, and was related to Dmitri. And I'd been hired by that company on Marcus's recommendation, placed exactly where the architect could watch me. Unless Marcus had placed me there to protect me. Unless the job at Nexus wasn't about surveillance, but about keeping me close to the enemy where Marcus could intervene if necessary. Unless I was looking at this all wrong. I need to talk to my mom, I said suddenly. Jake looked up from his screens. Your mom? Emma, you can't tell her about any of this. You'll just worry her, and if the architect is watching... I'm not going to tell her about the investigation, but Mom knew Dad better than anyone. If he suspected someone specific, if he mentioned anything in those final days before he died, she might remember details she didn't realize were important. It took me 30 minutes to drive to my childhood home in Lincoln Park, a modest house my mother had somehow held on to despite the financial pressures after Dad died. Thanks to Marcus, I now realized, though Mom had never known where that mysterious mortgage assistance had come from. Sarah Parker answered the door looking younger than her 50 years. Her auburn hair, the same shade as mine, pulled back in a ponytail. Emma? What a surprise. Is everything okay? Yeah, Mom, everything's fine. I just wanted to talk to you about something. I followed her into the kitchen, where she immediately started making tea, her universal response to any situation. You look tired, she observed, studying me with a mother's practiced eye. Are you sleeping enough? Eating properly? Mom, I need to ask you about Dad. The words stopped her mid-motion, the kettle hovering over the stove. About the time before he died. Do you remember if he mentioned anyone specific? Anyone he was worried about or having problems with? She set the kettle down carefully, then turned to face me. Emma, why are you asking about this now? It's been 10 years. I know. I've been thinking about him lately. There are things that didn't make sense. Things I was too young to understand then. I want to understand now. Mom was quiet for a long moment, then sighed. Your father changed in those last few months. He was stressed, worried about something he wouldn't discuss with me. I thought... She paused, old pain flickering across her face. I thought he was having an affair. He'd take calls at odd hours, disappear for meetings he wouldn't explain. I was preparing to confront him about it when he died. But you don't think that anymore? No. After he was gone. After I'd had time to process everything, I realized Thomas wasn't the type to have an affair. He was hiding something, yes, but not another woman. Something that scared him. She looked at me directly. Something that might have gotten him killed. My heart stopped. You think Dad was murdered? I don't know. The doctors said it was a heart attack, and he did have high blood pressure. But Emma, your father was planning to quit his job. 2 weeks before he died, he told me he was going to resign from Chicago Municipal, that we'd have to tighten our belts for a while. But it would be worth it. He said he'd been doing work he wasn't proud of, and he wanted to make it right. Then he died before he could resign, before he could make whatever right he was talking about. I absorbed this, pieces clicking into place. Did he ever mention someone named Dmitri? Or Victor? Mom frowned, thinking. Dmitri, yes. Russian man, I think. Your father met with him a few times. He never said why, but I got the impression they were working on something together. As for Victor... She paused. There was a Victor at your father's funeral. I remember because he barely said anything, just paid his respects and left quickly. Foreign accent, expensive suit. He seemed genuinely upset, but also nervous, like he was afraid to be there. Victor Volkov at my father's funeral. Dmitri working with Dad on something. Marcus as Dad's friend and protector. The pieces were all there, but I still couldn't see the full picture. Mom, did Dad ever mention someone called the architect? Her reaction was immediate and telling. She paled, gripping the counter for support. How do you know about the architect? Mom? Your father had nightmares near the end, she said quietly. He'd wake up in the middle of the night saying that name. The architect knows, he'd say. The architect is watching. I asked him who that was, but he'd just tell me not to worry, that he was handling it. Emma, what have you gotten yourself into? I couldn't lie to her, not completely. I found some of Dad's old files, research he was doing. I think he was investigating someone dangerous, and I think that's why he died. But Mom, I also think he was close to figuring it all out, and I want to finish what he started. No. Mom's voice was sharp, frightened. Absolutely not. Your father died trying to expose whoever this architect is. I won't lose you too. Emma, please let it go. Let him go. I can't. Dad deserves justice. And there are other people being hurt by whatever the architect is doing. I can't just walk away from that. Tears filled Mom's eyes. You're so much like him. That same stubborn determination to do the right thing, no matter the cost. That's what got Thomas killed. Don't let it kill you too. I hugged her. This woman who'd lost the love of her life and spent 10 years wondering if she could have prevented it. I'll be careful, I promise. But I have to do this. For Dad. For everyone. The architect has hurt. As I drove back to Jake's apartment, my phone rang. Marcus. Emma, we need to move up our meeting. Something's happened. Pier 17, tonight at 8. Come alone and Emma. Be ready for things to get complicated. He hung up before I could respond. I looked at the clock. 4 p.m., 4 hours until I walked into whatever trap or revelation was waiting at that pier. 4 hours to decide who I could trust and what I was willing to risk. I called Jake. Pull everything we have on tomorrow's shipment. We're going to Pier 17 tonight, and we're going to find out exactly who the architect is. Emma, that's insane. You're walking right into the truth, I finished. One way or another, this ends tonight. I spent 2 hours preparing with Jake before heading to Pier 17. We set up secure communications, dead man switches that would automatically upload all of Dad's files to multiple secure locations if I didn't check in every hour, and tracking protocols that would alert Jake if I moved beyond a certain geographic boundary. It was paranoid, possibly excessive, but my father had taught me that paranoia kept you alive. I wasn't about to ignore those lessons now. "You're sure about this?" Jake asked as I prepared to leave. "Because Emma, if Marcus is dirty, if he's working with the architect instead of against them, you're walking into an execution. If he wanted me dead, I'd already be dead. He's had 100 opportunities over the last 10 years. I checked the concealed recorder in my jacket, making sure it was functioning properly. Besides, I'm not going in blind. You'll have eyes on me the whole time through the tracker. If something goes wrong, if I don't check in, you release everything to the contacts Dad listed in his files. The journalists, the federal prosecutors he trusted. Everyone. And what about you? What's your exit strategy?" I smiled grimly. "Not dying. That's pretty much the whole strategy." The drive to the port of Chicago felt surreal. I'd driven these same streets countless times, past the same warehouses and shipping containers, never imagining I'd be heading there to confront a criminal conspiracy. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that felt uncomfortably like an omen. The port of Chicago stretched along Lake Michigan, a sprawling complex of piers, warehouses, and industrial equipment where billions of dollars of legitimate commerce flowed every year. It was also, according to Dad's files, a perfect location for smuggling anything from drugs to weapons to human beings. Pier 17 was at the northern edge of the port facility, separated from the main commercial operations. I parked where Jake and I had discussed, far enough away to avoid being boxed in, close enough to respond quickly if things went wrong. As I walked toward the pier, I could see the silhouette of a cargo ship offshore, waiting. The shipment Marcus had mentioned, presumably. But was it a trap for the architect? Or was I the one being trapped? Marcus was already there, standing near one of the empty warehouses that lined the pier. He wasn't alone. A tall, broad-shouldered man stood next to him. The same enforcer who'd met me at the warehouse 2 nights ago. And there was someone else, a figure I couldn't quite make out in the fading light. "Emma," Marcus called out as I approached. "Thank you for coming early. I know I'm asking a lot, but I need you to trust me." "Trust is earned," I replied, stopping a careful distance away. "And right now, I'm not sure you've earned it." To my surprise, Marcus nodded. "Fair enough. You've done your homework. Looked into my background, into Dimitri, into the connections your father was investigating. Smart. Your father would be proud." "Don't." The word came out sharper than I intended. "Don't tell me what my father would think. You don't get to use his memory to manipulate me." "You're right. I apologize." Marcus gestured to the other figure who stepped into the light. I recognized him from the photos in Dad's files. Dmitry Kozlov. 48 years old, with the bearing of someone who'd spent a lifetime in dangerous situations. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, curiosity mixed with something that might have been respect. "Emma Parker," Dmitry said, his accent still noticeable after 30 years in America. "You look like your father. Same eyes." Thomas had eyes that saw everything. "Did you kill him?" I asked bluntly. Dmitry didn't flinch. "No, but I know who did, and that's why we're here tonight. That's why Marcus moved up this meeting. Because the person who killed your father is coming here, right now, to oversee a shipment they think I'm bringing in for them." I looked at Marcus. "Explain. Now." Marcus pulled out a tablet, showing me shipping manifests and communication logs. "For the past 6 months, I've been setting up an operation, making contact with mid-level players in the architect's network, establishing credibility, working my way up the chain. 3 weeks ago, I finally made contact with someone high enough to matter. They offered me a deal, handle a major shipment through Chicago, and I'd get a cut of future operations. Full partnership." And you said yes. I said yes, because I knew if I handled this shipment, if I proved I could be trusted with something this important, the architect would finally come out of the shadows to supervise it personally. This isn't just any shipment, Emma. According to the intel I've gathered, this is chemical weapons precursors. Materials that can be used to manufacture nerve agents. The kind of thing that terrorists pay millions for. My blood ran cold. And you're letting this happen? I'm letting them think it's happening, Marcus corrected. The ship offshore? It's actually under Coast Guard control. We've been coordinating with federal agents for weeks. The containers are real, but they've been secured. When the architect shows up tonight to verify the shipment, they'll be walking into a trap. Dmitri spoke up. But there's a problem. We know the architect is coming, but we don't know which of the 3 people I've been coordinating with is actually the architect. They've been using intermediaries, covering their tracks. It could be Viktor Sokolov, who supposedly works for Dmitri. It could be someone from my organization, or it could be Viktor Volkov, I finished. From Nexus Systems, my boss. Both men looked at me in surprise. You figured that out, Marcus said, impressed. How? My father's files. He suspected Dmitri initially, but his final notes suggested someone else was pulling the strings. Someone involved in operations from 1995. Someone unexpected. Volkov fits every criterion. He has the background, the connections, and the motive. He used his security consulting expertise to build a criminal network, then cleaned up Nexus's image so he could hide in plain sight as a legitimate businessman. Dmitri nodded slowly. Thomas was close to proving this. He'd been investigating Viktor for months, gathering evidence. But he died before he could verify his suspicions. I didn't kill him, Emma, but I blame myself. I should have seen what was happening. Should have protected him better. Why should I believe you? You're a criminal. You've been part of this world for decades. Because I owed your father a debt, Dmitri said quietly. In 1998, I made a mistake. Got involved in an operation I didn't fully understand, and it turned out to be human trafficking. When I realized what I'd gotten into, I tried to back out. Viktor, the architect, decided to make an example of me, ordered my execution. Thomas Parker saved my life. He found evidence that could expose Viktor's operation, used it as leverage to protect me. He asked only one thing in return, that I help him bring down the real criminals, the ones who hurt innocent people. So you've been working with my father all along? And with Marcus. Your father trusted Marcus like a brother. When Thomas died, Marcus and I continued the investigation. But we had to be careful. Viktor has eyes everywhere, including in law enforcement. We couldn't make a move until we had ironclad evidence, until we could bring him down completely. Tonight is that night. I wanted to believe them. God, I wanted to believe that my father had been working with these men, that they'd honored his memory by continuing his fight. But I'd learned not to take anything at face value. Show me proof. Show me something that proves my father trusted you. Marcus handed me his phone, open to a photo album. The first picture made my throat tighten. Dad and Marcus, fishing together, both laughing at some joke. The next showed Dad at what looked like a safe house, surrounded by computers and files, with both Marcus and Dmitri visible in the background. Picture after picture, showing years of collaboration, of friendship, of shared purpose. Your father gave me something, Dmitri said. He told me if anything happened to him, I should give it to you when you were ready. I think you're ready now. He pulled out a small envelope, yellowed with age. Thomas wrote this the week before he died. Marcus and I have kept it safe for 10 years, waiting for the right moment. With shaking hands, I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter in my father's handwriting. Dearest Emma, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for keeping secrets, for not being honest about the dangerous work I was doing. But I need you to know that everything I did was to make the world safer for you. Marcus and Dimitri are good men in a bad business. They've helped me investigate crimes that the police either can't or won't pursue. Trust them. Work with them. Finish what I started. The architect must be stopped. The evidence is all there in the files I've compiled. You're brilliant enough to see the patterns I saw, and you're brave enough to act on them. Be careful, sweetheart. Be smart, and know that I love you more than anything in this world. Dad. Tears blurred my vision. This was really Dad's handwriting, his voice, his cadence. This wasn't a manipulation. These men had really been working with him. Okay, I said, voice rough with emotion. Okay, I believe you. So what's the plan? Marcus pulled up more information on his tablet. The shipment is scheduled to arrive at 10 p.m. Victor, the architect, has confirmed he'll be here to personally oversee the transfer. We have federal agents positioned around the perimeter, but they're maintaining distance to avoid spooking him. When Victor arrives, when he confirms the shipment and his involvement, they'll move in. But Emma, we need you here because Victor knows you work for Nexus. If he sees you, it adds legitimacy to the operation, makes him think everything is normal. You want me to be bait. I want you to be exactly what you are, a systems analyst from Nexus Systems who's here to verify the shipping documentation. Victor has used Nexus consultants on previous operations to provide technical cover. If you're here doing that job, he'll feel secure. And if he suspects I'm working against him, then we have a problem, Dimitri said honestly. Victor is paranoid, dangerous, and brilliant. If he even suspects a trap, he'll disappear, and we'll never get another chance at him. But Emma, you're Thomas Parker's daughter. You have your father's gift for reading situations, for staying calm under pressure. If anyone can sell this, it's you. I thought about my father, about the risks he'd taken to stop the architect, about the promise I'd made to finish what he started. What do I need to do? For the next hour, they briefed me on every detail of the operation. The shipment manifest I'd need to verify. The technical language I should use, the exact moment when I should step away so the federal agents could make their move. It was intricate, dangerous, and relied on dozens of things going exactly right. But it was also the best chance we had. At 9:45, I stood near the warehouse entrance with a tablet containing legitimate Nexus Systems security protocols. I was wearing a jacket with the Nexus logo, playing the role Marcus had described. My heart hammered, but I kept my expression neutral, professional. Just another consultant doing a routine job. The black SUV arrived exactly at 10. Viktor Volkov stepped out, looking every bit the successful executive in his expensive suit. He was 52, with silver hair and the kind of authoritative presence that commanded rooms. He'd always been friendly to me at work, mentoring even. The thought that this man had killed my father made me want to scream. Instead, I smiled. Mr. Volkov, I wasn't expecting to see you here. He looked surprised but not alarmed. Emma, what are you doing at the port? Nexus was contracted to verify the security protocols for a shipment. I drew the short straw for the night shift. I held up my tablet. Just need to confirm everything matches the manifest and I can get out of your hair. Victor relaxed slightly, the calculation visible in his eyes. Having me here, an unsuspecting Nexus employee, actually helped his cover. Of course. Professional as always. I'm here representing our clients' interests. You know how particular some clients can be about valuable cargo. Valuable. That was certainly one word for chemical weapons precursors. I pulled up the manifest on my tablet, starting the verification process while Victor spoke with the dock workers. Behind him, Marcus and Dimitri were approaching, playing their roles. And somewhere in the shadows, federal agents were moving into position. Everything was going according to plan. And then Victor's phone rang. He answered, listened, and I saw his expression change. In that instant, I knew. He knew. Somehow, despite all our precautions, the architect knew this was a trap. Victor looked directly at me, and in his eyes I saw the cold intelligence that had kept him ahead of investigators for decades. "Emma," he said calmly, "I think we need to have a conversation about your father." Time seemed to slow down. Victor Volkov standing in front of me, phone in hand, wearing an expression that was equal parts regret and resignation. Behind him, Marcus and Dmitri had both frozen, hands moving toward concealed weapons. Federal agents were closing in, but they were still 30 seconds away, an eternity in a situation like this. "You know," Victor said conversationally, as if we were discussing a project at the office rather than standing in the middle of a federal operation, "I always wondered if Thomas had told you anything before he died. If he'd left behind evidence that would eventually lead you here. I suppose I should have anticipated this. You killed my father." My voice was steady, cold. "You murdered him because he was getting too close to exposing you." "I did what was necessary to protect an enterprise that took me 2 decades to build," Victor corrected, his tone matter-of-fact. "Your father was brilliant, Emma. One of the finest analysts I'd ever encountered. When Nexus was just starting out, when we were still taking certain questionable contracts, Thomas was the one who designed our security protocols. He made us what we are today." The implication hit me like a physical blow. "Dad worked for you? For the architect?" "He consulted for Nexus, yes. But he had no idea about the scope of my other operations. Thomas thought we were just a security firm that occasionally bent regulations. He had no idea I was using Nexus infrastructure to coordinate international criminal operations. When he found out, when he started investigating, I tried to convince him to walk away. Offered him money, protection, anything he wanted. But Thomas Parker was a stubborn, idealistic fool who thought he could bring me down. So you had him killed." "I created a heart attack," Victor said simply. "Injected potassium chloride into his coffee at work. Untraceable. Looks completely natural, especially in someone with high blood pressure. It was quick, painless. More mercy than I've shown most people who threatened my operations. But make no mistake, Emma. I took no pleasure in it. Your father was a good man. He just made the mistake of believing his conscience mattered more than survival." Rage flooded through me, hot and overwhelming, but I forced it down. Stay calm, stay focused. Dad had taught me that emotion was the enemy of clear thinking, and now? What happens now? You kill me too? Kill everyone here? Victor smiled sadly. I was prepared to do exactly that, yes. I received a call 10 minutes ago from one of my sources in the Coast Guard. They warned me this was a setup, that federal agents were involved. I came anyway, because I wanted to see for myself. Wanted to understand how much you'd figured out. He gestured to the pier, the waiting ship, the agents surrounding us. This is well done. Your father would be proud. You've managed to coordinate federal and criminal resources, set a trap that even I walked into. That takes intelligence and courage. Then surrender, I said. It's over, Victor. Even if you try to run, they'll catch you. The evidence is overwhelming. Perhaps, but there are still choices to be made, outcomes to be determined. Victor looked at Marcus and Dmitri. You two have played this well, pretending to work for me while actually working against me. I assume the last 6 months of operations were all theater? Building my trust so I'd expose myself? Every second of it, Marcus confirmed, his weapon now openly displayed. You killed my best friend, Victor. Did you really think I'd let that go unanswered? I had hoped you'd be pragmatic. Thomas was one man. My organization moves billions of dollars annually, employs thousands of people. I thought you understood that sometimes individual lives have to be sacrificed for the greater enterprise. Victor shook his head. But I see now that I miscalculated. You allowed sentiment to override business sense. Sentiment? Dimitri's voice was harsh. Thomas saved my life. He was a better man than any of us. You didn't sacrifice him for business, Victor. You killed him to protect your empire. There's a difference. Victor was about to respond when the federal agents finally moved in, surrounding us with weapons drawn. Victor Volkov, the lead agent called out. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, international money laundering, and trafficking in illegal weapons. Put your hands where we can see them. For a moment, I thought Victor might actually comply. Then he did something I didn't expect. He laughed. Not a nervous laugh, but genuine amusement. You think this ends with my arrest? You think I built this organization without contingency plans? He pulled out his phone, and before anyone could stop him, he sent a message. I've just authorized the release of information to 15 different journalists and prosecutors. Evidence that will implicate everyone who ever worked with me, including you, Marcus. Including you, Dimitri. All the operations you participated in, all the crimes you committed, everything documented and authenticated. If I go down, everyone goes down. Marcus's expression hardened. You're bluffing. Am I? Victor looked directly at me. Emma, ask yourself this. If I go to prison, if my organization is dismantled, what happens to all the legitimate businesses that depend on our infrastructure? The banks that unknowingly process our transactions? The shipping companies that move our cargo? Hundreds of businesses, thousands of employees, all suddenly exposed to criminal liability. The economic damage alone would devastate Chicago. Better than letting you continue, I said, though my stomach churned at the implications. Is it? Your father struggled with that same question. That's why he hesitated. Why he spent so long gathering evidence instead of just going to the authorities. Because he understood that bringing down an organization like mine creates chaos. Power vacuums that get filled by worse people. Economic collapse that hurts innocent people. Thomas was trying to find a way to dismantle the architects' network without causing collateral damage. That's why he was building his case so carefully, so precisely. I thought about Dad's files, about the meticulous way he'd documented everything. Victor was right. Dad hadn't just been gathering evidence. He'd been trying to find a surgical solution, a way to remove the cancer without killing the patient. What are you proposing? Emma, no, Marcus warned. Don't negotiate with him. But I held up a hand. Let him talk. Victor lowered his phone slightly. I'm proposing a different outcome. I surrender. I cooperate fully with federal investigators. I provide evidence about every criminal organization I've ever worked with, every corrupt official, every dirty operation. But in exchange, we do this intelligently. We dismantle the architects' network piece by piece, transferring legitimate operations to clean management, severing criminal connections without destroying the infrastructure that innocent people depend on. It will take time, maybe years, but it's the only way to end this without creating something worse. The lead federal agent had moved closer during this conversation. Mr. Volkov, you're in no position to negotiate terms. Actually, Agent Morrison, I think I am. Victor gestured to his phone. Because in about 30 seconds, if I don't send a cancellation code, those files get released. And when they do, you'll spend the next decade trying to untangle the legal mess. Innocent people will lose their jobs, their savings, their freedom. Criminal organizations will move into the vacuum I leave, and they'll be far less restrained than I was. Or, he paused, we can do this intelligently. I cooperate. I help you build cases against people who actually deserve prison. We transition the architects' network into something legitimate. And justice gets served without unnecessary collateral damage. I looked at Marcus and Dimitri, both of whom seemed torn. Then I looked at Agent Morrison, who was clearly calculating the same complex equation Dad had struggled with. Finally, I looked at Victor Volkov, the man who'd killed my father, and I made my choice. No deal, I said firmly. My father died because he believed some things were worth the cost. Justice is one of them. You don't get to hold innocent people hostage to escape consequences. Release your files if you want. We'll deal with the fallout. But you're going to prison for what you did to Thomas Parker, and I'm not going to compromise on that. Victor studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You really are your father's daughter. Very well, Emma. I accept defeat. He lowered his phone, and I watched him delete the threatened message. The truth is, those files don't exist. I was bluffing, hoping sentiment for the innocent would let me negotiate better terms. But you called my bluff, just like Thomas would have. As federal agents moved in to handcuff Victor, he looked at me one last time. For what it's worth, I am sorry about your father. He was a genuinely good person in a world that doesn't reward genuine goodness. And Emma, be careful following in his footsteps. The world needs people like you and Thomas, but it also destroys them. They led him away, and suddenly I was surrounded by federal agents taking statements, securing the scene, processing what had just happened. Marcus appeared at my side, putting a hand on my shoulder. You did good, kid. Your father would be proud. I just sent his killer to prison. That doesn't bring him back. No, it doesn't. But it means Thomas didn't die for nothing. Everything he worked for, everything he sacrificed, it mattered. You made sure of that. Over the next few hours, as the operation wound down, I learned the full scope of what we'd accomplished. Victor's arrest had triggered a cascade of operations across multiple states. The shipment of chemical weapons precursors was secured. 15 members of the Architects Network were arrested. And most importantly, the evidence Dad had compiled, combined with what Marcus and Dimitri had gathered over the past decade, was finally being used to build prosecutable cases. By dawn, I was exhausted, emotionally drained, but also strangely at peace. Jake met me as I finally left the pier, pulling me into a tight hug. You're okay. Thank God. You're okay. I was monitoring everything, and when I saw Victor show up, I thought, I know. I thought the same thing. But it's over now. Really over. So what happens next? You go back to your normal life? Pretend none of this happened? I laughed at that. I don't think I can go back to Nexus Systems considering my boss turned out to be an international criminal mastermind. But Marcus mentioned something about consulting for his operations, helping him transition everything into legitimate businesses. Apparently he's serious about getting out of the criminal world, wants to honor Dad's memory by becoming the kind of person Dad believed he could be. And you trust him? I thought about Marcus's grief when he talked about Dad, about the decade he'd spent keeping his promise to protect me and Mom. Yeah, I do. Which is crazy, I know. But Dad trusted him, and Dad was right about most things. 3 months later, I stood in my new office, an actual, legitimate office in a consulting firm that Marcus had founded to help criminal organizations transition to legal businesses. It was strange work, using my skills to dismantle the infrastructure Dad had once helped build. But it felt right, like I was finishing what he'd started in a way that honored his memory. Mom was proud, even though I'd had to explain carefully that my new consulting work involved some unusual clients. Sarah Parker was tougher than people gave her credit for. She'd survived losing the love of her life, had raised me alone, and now she was watching me follow in Dad's footsteps in ways she'd never imagined. Marcus stopped by my office one afternoon, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen him. Thought you'd want to know. Victor's testimony is paying off. They've already taken down 3 major criminal organizations using his information. And the prosecutors have agreed to transition Nexus Systems operations to new management. Your father's files are going to change how federal agencies investigate organized crime. Good. That's what he wanted. Evidence that would actually stop criminals, not just punish them. Marcus leaned against my desk, and for a moment he looked older, tired. Emma, there's something I never told you. Something I think you should know. What's that? Your father asked me to watch over you? Yes. But there's a reason I agreed so immediately. So completely. Thomas Parker saved my life when I was 23 years old. I was in over my head in a situation I didn't understand, about to be killed by people I thought were allies. Your father stepped in, used his connections, his expertise to get me out. He didn't have to do that. I was just some punk kid trying to build a criminal empire. But he saw something in me worth saving. Dad always saw the best in people, I said softly. He did. And he told me that day that I had a choice. I could become what everyone expected, just another thug. Or I could be better. Use the intelligence and resources I had to build something that mattered. I spent the next 20 years trying to figure out what that meant. Trying to balance survival in a dangerous world with actually doing something worthwhile. Marcus looked at me directly. Working with you these last few months, finishing what Thomas started, transitioning these organizations into legitimate businesses. This is what he meant. This is what being better looks like. He'd be happy about that, about you. I hope so. Because Emma, your father was my moral compass when I didn't have one of my own. And now you are. Every time I have to make a difficult decision, I ask myself, what would Thomas do? What would Emma think? It's exhausting, being held to that standard. But it's also the only thing that keeps me honest, and I smiled at that. Well, in that case, I should tell you that the Kozlov shipping operation is still doing some questionable business on the side. Nothing illegal exactly, but definitely gray area. Dmitri needs to clean that up if we're going to maintain our credibility. Marcus laughed. I'll talk to him, see? This is exactly what I mean. You're like a conscience I can't ignore. As he left, I turned back to my computer, pulling up the latest files I was analyzing. They were from another organization requesting our help transitioning to legitimate operations. A surprisingly common request since word had spread about our work. It turned out that a lot of criminals actually wanted to go straight. They just didn't know how to do it, without ending up dead or broke. That night, I visited my father's grave for the first time in months. Lakeshore Cemetery, where oak trees provided shade and Lake Michigan was visible in the distance. I'd brought flowers, purple irises, Dad's favorite. And I sat there in the gathering dusk, talking to him the way I used to when I was young and thought he could solve any problem. I finished it, Dad, I said quietly. Everything you started, I finished. Victor is in prison. The architect's network is dismantled. And Marcus, your friend Marcus, he's becoming the man you always believed he could be. We're helping other people do the same. Helping criminals become something better. The wind rustled through the oak leaves, and I imagined it was Dad's way of responding. I know you'd tell me to be careful, that this work is dangerous, that I should live a normal life, find someone to settle down with, be safe. But Dad, you didn't play it safe. You saw something wrong and you fought to fix it, even when it cost you everything. How can I do less? I sat there until full dark, talking to my father's memory, making promises I intended to keep, to finish his work, to help Marcus build something legitimate, to honor Thomas Parker's sacrifice by making sure it meant something. And somewhere in Chicago, in a federal detention center, Viktor Volkov was cooperating with prosecutors, providing testimony that would bring down criminal organizations across the country. It wasn't redemption. You don't get redemption for murder. But it was something, an acknowledgement that even bad people could contribute to good outcomes. That justice was complex, messy, and sometimes required you to work with the very people you'd sworn to oppose. Dad would have understood that. He'd spent years navigating those same moral complexities, trying to find ways to stop criminals without creating worse problems. Now I was doing the same, using his methods, honoring his memory, and maybe, just maybe, making Chicago a little bit safer. As I drove home through the city streets, past the warehouses and piers where so much had happened, I thought about the call I'd intercepted 3 months ago. The accidental connection that had changed everything. At the time, it had seemed like catastrophe. Now it felt like fate. Like Dad had somehow known I'd need to finish what he started, had left me the tools and knowledge and connections to do exactly that. "Thanks, Dad," I whispered to the night. "For everything. For teaching me to see patterns, to think clearly under pressure, to never give up on doing what's right. I won't let you down." And in my heart, I knew he was proud. Thomas Parker's daughter, finishing what he'd started, walking the same dangerous path he'd walked, but doing it with her eyes open and her father's lessons guiding every step. The architect's network was broken. Justice had been served, and Emma Parker was just getting started.